Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. Today, my guest is Jake McKee, who's a community strategist and a founder. He has been one of the pioneers of the customer community movement. In this engaging conversation, Jake delves into the importance of community-driven product development and how organizations can harness customer voices to shape better products. Drawing from his experience at Lego, Apple, and other major brands, Jake shares insights into how human connections, relationships, and shared purpose drive engagement and innovation. He also talks about the qualities that make a great community manager. Listen on. Hi, Jake. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
Yeah. In fact, the first question that I had when I got your mail was that how does community fit into the Software People Stories? Then I realized that software development also, they say, is a team sport. And it is all about for the community and getting the first-hand perspectives and guidance on communities in different contexts would make it very interesting for our listeners. But before we get into all that, if you can start with your origin story and your career trajectory, we'll probably take it from there.
Yeah, happy to do it. So, to give just a very brief background, I'm a longtime community guy. I've been developing communities or in some form or fashion for 20 plus years now at companies like Lego and Apple, and for clients like Southwest Airlines and EA Games and Canon Camera and a whole bunch more. And my background, I originally started my college career anyway with focus on product design. And I went to a school that didn't have a product design curriculum, and so I kind of built my own and merged the design school with the engineering school, and have in many ways continued that path for the entirety of my career, bridging the creative world and the engineering world in ways that actually create connection to customers in some form or fashion, right? And community has always been really fascinating to me because it has been a bridge role between engineers and companies, and the creatives, the people outside the company, the consumers buying the products, and figuring out how to make sure that both those parties can talk to each other, right, and understand each other, get excited about working together with each other. And one of the things that I've spent a lot of time on in the last few years, even though it's been kind of an ongoing theme of my career, is this idea of community-driven product development. Mm-hmm. So the idea of actually bringing in passionate customers, representative voices from your customer and community base into the product development cycle itself in ways that make sense in small, manageable forms, but really being programmatic about how do you bring in those passionate voices and put them side by side with the people developing your products, your services, your software. We tend to do a lot of bookending where we've got sort of a collection process up front where we get all of our data and our research, and a verification process at the end where we verify, is what we built functional? But in between there is the entirety of the product development cycle. And other than a few times where we might pop up and take a survey or check something we're working on with, with through a two-way mirror room or something like that, we don't do a lot, generally speaking, about keeping those passionate customer voices in the product development cycle of day to day as you're developing. And so, I've been doing more and more of that. And of course, there's also how AI fits into this, and we can talk more about that, I'm sure. But there's a lot that I have to say as a relational guy about building relationships with intelligent systems, just the same way that we would build it with companies or our customers.
Yeah, wonderful. So, does the concept or the importance of community vary whether it's a product, that is a physical product or a service, or whether the organization in the B2B or the B2C space?
Yeah, I think so. So I think your question is, does this idea of community, a company engaging directly with its customers, does that work no matter whether it's product, physical product, digital service, B2B, B2C, B2B2C, who knows what, right? Does it work for everybody? And granted, I'm terribly biased because I'm a longtime community guy, so absolutely I believe that's true. The question is more about how does that work? What are we trying to achieve, right? A company like Lego, who has a very enthusiastic base of creative minds, is doing something very different than a chemical company that's working directly with B2B engineers, right? But the principles of human connection are all basically the same. It's the strategy and the programs that we develop that make sense relative to that audience, right? Relative to that situation. And that also, it's not just the type of company or just the type of product, it's also the situation. So if you've launched a product in the past and it's gone terribly, and you've had a new product launch go bad, and all of your customers are standing at the castle walls with pitchforks and torches saying, that was terrible, it's ruined our business. Well, when you launch the next version, you need to have some thoughts about how do we include the voice of the customer in our development cycle so that we can better understand how to avoid those problems. How do we think about, in advance of launching, how do we launch the project so that we can make sure that it's launched to avoid some of those past issues, right? How do we have open and relational conversations with our customer base in a way that makes it more than just collecting data, right? Sending out a survey, or even sitting across the table with a group of engineers and saying, what do you like and not like about our product? Well, it's helpful, it's good information, but it's not relational, right? And even sitting across the table from engineers and having them say, well, I didn't like this, I didn't like this, I didn't like this. Okay, that's helpful, but that's an in-person version of a survey, right? We're not really creating a relationship that over time gets deeper, that they create more advocacy for us. We get better insights into what they're doing over time, right? If you ask me a question, I can give you an answer, but it may be more complex in giving you a full understanding of my experience. It's very different than giving you an answer to my question about that experience, right? And those things, that is community at its core. It's not just building an online forum and having people do peer-to-peer support. It can be a whole lot of different things that get people connected to each other and to your company for positive gain.
So, how critical is the strength of the brand to ensure that the community is active or is actively engaged, at least?
Yeah, I don't think that's the question, and it's one that comes up often, right? Well, I'm not. When I say I've worked at Lego, people go, "Oh, yeah." Again, I'll use that chemical engineering, and chemical production company example. We're just a chemical company. We don't make cool stuff like Lego. And my point has always been, it's not about understanding whether the brand or the product is quote unquote good enough for this type of community engagement. It's really more the question of what is the purpose that's behind what you're doing, right? It's one thing to create chemicals for chemical's sake and then you're done talking about it. It's another thing to put it in the context of, we are a company that's making chemicals that are safer for the environment and still have the same value and effectiveness as the ones that hurt the environment, right?
Mm.
That's something a lot of engineers could get behind, right?
Mm.
With when I was at Lego, I talked a lot about how Lego wasn't a toy for boys 7 to 12. It was a creative medium.
Mm.
Because if I could convince the world that it was a creative medium, I could get all kinds of people to buy all kinds of products because that wasn't really about us just pushing boxes
Mhm.
through the store shelves to get people to buy. It was about changing the way that they thought about or participated with creativity as an overall concept and making it much more this idea of creation much more accessible, right?
Mm.
And it's really easy to get excited about the idea of whether you're a grandparent that wants to buy something valuable for their grandchild for their birthday instead of just a throwaway toy, or whether you're an educator who really wants to get people to understand creativity, or whether you're an adult fan who just really loves building great sculptures and sharing them with the world. It's more about that purpose, and I can get you to support the purpose, which then inherently leads to buying boxes. But that purpose is really the starting point. So the question is, does our team, does our company, does our project, does our product have value around purpose? Do we have a clear purpose that we're sharing? And if not, why? Right? I've again, this is my community guy bias, but I think there's always a way to find purpose behind what you're doing.
Mm.
There's a story for every company's founding, right? Nobody in the history of the world said, well, I don't know, this is just a way to make money. I don't really care what the thing is. There's always some level of passion behind it. Some places more than others, but there's always some level of passion that started the company in the first place or started the project in the first place. How do we tap into that and help other people outside the company and maybe even in the company get intertwined with that, really feel like that's something that they want to share in as well? Because once I do that, then the idea of getting them to talk about it or participate with others or help support others to be part of something that's being created, that's the easy part.
Oh, okay. Um, well, when you talk about products or services that either have a very loyal fan following or loyal user
Mhm.
base, or it has something unique in terms of technology or the value that
Mhm.
they offer, how do you get the people in the company, say predominantly engineers, to have empathy for the users?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and that's part of the work that I do at its core is really helping companies to understand, uh, how do we build that purpose, but also how do we then get everybody involved, aligned with it, whether that's people inside the company, your leadership. There's a lot of times that a client will hire me and they're sort of mid-level management and they're excited to build something, and then we put it in front of the executive team, and the executive team pushes back and says, "This seems like a waste of money. What's the value?" Um, so it's a very fair question. I think the biggest way I answer that question is to say, number one, these are business programs, right? This is part of business strategy. This isn't something we're doing just because we're nice and we want to add on, an extra giveaway for the the loyal customer base or potentially loyal customer base. We're doing these programs as business function. So the question starts first and foremost with, what's the business need? Right? Every CEO has their top three things they want to work on that year. And so if those top three things are improving customer retention, increasing renewal rates, and driving feature adoption. I'm making those three things up, but let's say that those are the three. Then you can imagine the very first thing I'm going to start with is thinking about everything we do from a community standpoint through how do we get customers more engaged with those outcomes as well, right? What's if it's driving retention, it's not something where we go to the customer base. I think this sometimes traditional marketers get lost in this idea of, well, I've got to increase retention, so we're going to go and do a retention campaign.
Mm.
Okay, well, maybe you start with some insights about why they're not being retained, but then how does that morph into changing behaviors and whatnot long term? And I think that's where community can really be effective is not only to help understand what's behind some of our survey results, but also to help us figure out what do we ask in our survey results, right? If we have a good relationship with our customer base or community base, then we'll understand kind of what questions to ask. We'll have a lens through which to understand those answers that we get back. But really, we start with, what does the business need and what is the purpose of what we're trying to achieve? Once we have those two things in place, it becomes much easier to start having conversations with executives or managers about why this is important in the first place, right? I can go to a CEO and say, your biggest issue this year is renewal rate. You saw a 20% decline in renewals last year. Excellent. I can help you first figure out why, and second, figure out how to address it, right? And how to drive interest and connection around that retention issue, or the renewal issue. And that always perks the ears up, right? One of the first questions is, well, how is this different from the marketing we're doing already? Or, we've increased our sales commissions so that our salespeople are working harder to get those renewals, whatever it might be. We're doing market research to understand in traditional quantitative methods what's happening out there and why we dropped. And I can start to say, yeah, but I can bring you a better understanding, more deeper connection. And I can bring you relationships that will not only help you understand and increase retention, but maintain retention over time. Because, I can build a connection between the customer and the company that is much more personal, much more human. And in those cases, I don't know about you, but I've got friends that, have sort of come and gone out of my life for 40 years now, but they're still my friend. They've always been my friend. Sometimes they're up, sometimes they're down, sometimes they annoy me, sometimes they don't. But that is friendship. They stay around, right? They retain themselves, so to speak. I think that's issue one. It's really just how does it tap into the business issue, the business needs in that particular moment. I think the second piece is just making it as real as possible. How do you bring either actual people or actual people's stories through video, through text, through whatever, but sometimes through actual people? I want to introduce the CEO to 3 people I've brought into the office to share their story, because we often think, oh, hey, I went to a user group meeting one time 3 years ago. I understand users, but it's easy to forget. It's hard to understand. And, at the same time, I also, doing those sorts of activities is really powerful in not only helping executives understand, but bringing the executive presence back into the customer base or community base so that they say, wow, these guys really care about us, right? And again, so much of this comes back to, we're talking about humans building deep, honest human connection relationships. And a relationship is always two-way. So, how do we get this interconnection between, we're bringing the executives out into the community, we're bringing the community into the executive boardroom so that everybody starts to understand everybody else a little better. And, it's my 20 years old mantra of everybody goes home happy, right? How do we figure out what makes everybody happy, and how do we communicate that we're working towards that with each other? And that, a lot of times I've seen executives go from not interested to, wow, this is amazing, we need to do more of it, simply by seeing real people in person doing their real stuff once, right? There's something powerful. If you've ever taken somebody who's not been to like a factory visit, right, or on-site visit with clients, and they actually see what they're doing with the products that they spend so much time working on, there's this moment of like, oh, this is really cool what I'm doing at work, right? And anybody that gives us joy creates connection and loyalty to us, right? And so, how do we create both joy in both sides of that equation?
Yeah, I'm reminded of the fiasco that Sonos got into probably about a year or a little more than that, when they had a software upgrade of their controller app, which kind of broke everything that used to work, and then which upset the user community completely. And then I think it took them quite a while, because they couldn't just go back to the older version. And it was called as a PR disaster, but I guess it was because they didn't even listen to their communities as to what they wanted, and they just kind of steamrolled some of these changes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going through that actually right this moment. I went this weekend to try and use my 3D printer slicing software, and I could do everything except save, so that I could actually take the file over to the printer and make the print work, right? I looked on their official website, couldn't find anything about it. I double checked my emails and my spam folder to see if they had sent an email saying, hey, there's a problem. I went on some of the unofficial Facebook groups asking questions and found a bunch of people saying, hey, I have the same issue. I went on their Discord, the official Discord channel, and asked questions. And that's where I finally found some answers, where basically in this latest Mac OS update, there was something about the QuickTime libraries that broke my software on my computer, right? But there was no in-app notification that said, hey, by the way, we recognize it, we understand it. Okay, maybe the infrastructure wasn't there to send me that kind of note. Fair enough. I went to my email and there wasn't any update in the email saying, hey, by the way, the primary function of our software is broken and it is unusable until it's fixed. And here's the steps we're taking to do that, right? It was just a desire to kind of hide it and hold it back. And they were sharing openly. And if I emailed them directly and they said, I'm happy to tell you the details. Here's what's going on. And I was like, yeah, why did I have to reach out to you to get this information? Right. And that's that sort of that relational piece. It's really easy to break that. But, honestly, I want to support them as a small company. Right. This isn't something where, it's a cold corporate entity. I want to know the people behind and the faces behind the company, because when something goes wrong and they reach out to me proactively and transparently and say, here's what's going on. We totally understand that you're concerned. We're going to share in every way possible what's happening so we can be honest about this instead of being quiet and, well, maybe nobody will notice and I'm going to back away slowly, right? It created a really kind of a rocky relationship moment where it could have been an amazing moment of connection, right? If I had seen real people saying, there's a real problem, we wanted to tell you about it quickly, here's exactly what we're doing for it, and here's the expected timeline for it. Crisis averted in a lot of ways, because we all could understand that, there's a lot of moving parts to the software we use and the development cycles and all that stuff. It's when we go quiet that's the problem. Just like in any relationship, right? If you and I got it sideways with each other and neither one of us were talking to each other, it wouldn't get better. If you came to me and said, man, Jake, I didn't really like that thing you did the other day, and here's why, and I'd be like, oh man, okay, I understand now. Thank you for sharing. Here's what I'll do next time to improve that, right? This is basic human relation stuff that we sometimes forget when we walk through the doors of the job that we have. And much of that's driven by our increasing culture of risk avoidance, right? That nobody wants to admit anything, nobody wants to be at fault for anything, nobody wants to share because something might get stolen or leaked out or whatever, which are all fair concerns. But we've taken it to the extreme where everybody in the business world is so scared of something happening that we're not doing enough to keep things from happening or having them be a blip when they do happen instead of a big, huge issue, right?
Yeah, that's a very important point and interesting one, because from what I've seen, most communities have a few contributors, maybe a few more consumers, and most of them are just hanging around, either because of FOMO or whatever. So how do you create a safe space for everyone to kind of come together and be more active and actively engaged?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's sort of at the core of what community strategy is all about, right? Which community strategy at its core says, where are the places, the activities, the principles that are going to guide the space or the program or the activity that we're going to put in place. So, part of that is really understanding that every single instance is different in some way. I run an event on the side called CX Sessions, and also its sister event called AI Sessions. Both of those events are 5 people, 2 hours, virtual meetup midday. I've been doing about 6 years now, basically every month. And they are absolutely fascinating conversations because it's 5 people, which makes it a much smaller, much more powerful discussion because it's safe. It feels safe. Now that's a very different dynamic than a 10,000 or 50,000 strong customer support forum where people can go ask support questions of random people on the internet when they get stuck, right? both of those have value, but for one, for me as somebody who's really excited to get really deep on conversation and talk to people in a way that's much more open and transparent and honest as a community guy, and you can imagine that would be my preference. That 5 people is really powerful. And if it went to 10 or certainly beyond, the dynamic starts to shift pretty radically, right? And so when we talk about making safe spaces, safe means what is it that we're here to do? What do we want to talk about? Some engineering, some types of engineering are really interested in a lot of peer-to-peer discussion. Others are very, very scared to have any sort of peer-to-peer discussion because of the nature of the companies they work for, or the space they're in, how you would treat something like a SaaS consumer-oriented service design, digital service design space would be very different than something that you were doing with defense contractors, right? Both of them are places where the developers, I'm sure, have interest in talking to developers like them. But those defense contractors are inherently going to be more risk avoidant. And so maybe smaller groups helps, or programs that aren't just open peer-to-peer support, but that are more webinar based or session based, so that you can have either peer-to-peer conversations around a round table, or you're having more of a guided conversation from a facilitator or a presenter with comments that have really good facilitation that help bring people out and kind of draw out their participation around some of those spheres of risk. It really, again, it goes to the core of, what does safe space mean to you and your team? And what do you need? What are you trying to do? When I do these community-driven product development projects, some of those are 6-month long projects where we have 4 or 5 people that are really deeply embedded into the product team. And the product managers or the product engineers, software engineers, they may end up talking to the program that I put together, those folks, those 5 people, they may end up interacting with them every couple of days. Another program might be 6 weeks and be 40 people, and it's much more guided, and we give them product, we get some feedback, but it's much deeper than just simply review this and then post a review online. It really is working when there's still time in the development cycle to make changes, to identify real issues. But it really just goes to what is it we're trying to achieve, what's the audience like that we're dealing with. Getting chemical engineers out of their shells may be very different than getting marketing professionals out of their shells and willing to participate, right? So that's really kind of how we design these programs, is asking some of those fundamental questions up front.
Taking that forward a little bit, does it make a difference who is actually the coordinator or the sponsor for the community, whether it is from the company or an external expert like you?
Well, so what I believe is that, as an external consultant, I do this sort of work for a living, and I always call myself a sleeves rolled up consultant, because I'm typically side by side with my clients in a way that is, pretty deeply embedded, right? Not all of my projects. I do a lot of stuff where I'll come in and just kind of give some advice for a day or a week and then step out. But most of my longer term projects, are set up in a way that I can really work side by side with my clients. But whether it's either one, the goal really is to have the company understand at its core how to do this kind of work. I believe in the person who's the face of this program, the community manager for this program, or the program lead, whatever you want to call it. They are the person representing the entity you're making the relationship with, right? They don't go away. Yeah, I know people come and go out of companies all the time, but what I mean is that we're looking for somebody who is absolutely and permanently connected to the company, right? Somebody who works there. Now, if you bring in somebody like me and I'm doing work on a regular basis, yeah, there's times where I've basically had about half my clients, actually, I have email addresses from the company for them, and I just present myself as, I'm part of the team. I'm a member of the team. Because if I go away or my project ends, or, the goal of that project very often is to have me participate until the people I'm working with say, I got it, we're good now, right? And then I'll step away. But as part of that process, I'm just another member of the team, right? And I think that that's one thing that has been very clear over the years that I've been doing this. And there was a period of time about 10 years ago where everybody said, oh, we don't need anybody full time. We don't need it to be, the face of the community doesn't need to be the face of, a person who actually works here. And it didn't go well, right? Because people started saying, well, again, this is all at its core, building a relationship that will lead to positive sentiment and loyalty and advocacy and defense on your company's behalf and repeat purchase and retention. Those all come from having a relationship, right? And if I'm going away or I'm the external expert that just comes in to set something up and then leave, it's hard for the community itself to build a relationship with me. And I've always said that I'd rather have an imperfect, honest relationship than a perfect, dishonest relationship.
Yeah.
And that's part of the human experience, right? It's the people we connect with have flaws and we know it. And if somebody gets something wrong, cool. But if we're honest and transparent about it, that's fine. And most, especially engineers, they definitely want to be talking to somebody that they believe is there as part of that purpose, part of that connection to what they're there for, more so than just somebody who can facilitate well, right?
Maybe a small segue. From your experience, have you had any situations where the concept of a community has been used within an organization, mainly to, let's say, break silos?
Yes. So I will reframe that a little bit. Let me tell you that the best projects that I've seen around this idea of community customer engagement are the ones that put all the relevant voices in the room as we think about how to build it, as we run it, as we review it on a regular basis to see how we're doing. I think one of the things that gets really lost is this idea that, oh, well, we'll start, we'll hire a community manager or we'll put a small community team in place, and then that'll be its own separate silo. I strongly believe that community is a embedded, interwoven function of not any one part of the business, but the entirety of the business, right? Because how the marketing impacts, how the support team impacts the end user, how the product team and the engineering team impacts the user, those are all wrapped up into the singular experience that they're having with the company, its products, its people, right? There is a singular experience that you and I have with the brands that we like, right? I'm a huge Nike fan. I've been buying Nikes for years and years. I barely buy any other tennis shoes except them. I'm not even sure the last time I bought something that wasn't Nike, but I don't think about them as marketing and engineering and product development and support and something else. I think about them as Nike. And when they put people in front of me that represent any part of the company, that's the experience I'm having. So to your question, how can community be used to break down silos? I think the fundamental question is, we know we need to engage with our customers more directly, more honestly, more humanistic, because that's what so many consumers are expecting now. And the best way to do that is to have a robust community program of some sort, whether that's a forum or engagement programs on a small basis through product development or any other type of program. The best way to do that is through those programs. And the best way to make those programs successful is to have all the teams that are impacted present. That doesn't mean that it's all shared responsibility. It doesn't mean that every meeting has representation from all 5 silos internally. It just means that when we do big things or make big decisions, that we have a group process for that, right? And whether that's it's the same theory, whether it's getting input from the community or whether it's about getting our colleagues involved. My old business partner always called it the ugly baby syndrome, that everybody's seen an ugly baby, but nobody in the history of mankind has ever had an ugly baby, right? When you create it, it is beautiful. So one of the ways to break down silos, if that's a problem in your company, is to put in place a really robust community program, because you can't do those things independently. I can't go in and build a community program built solely on product development without also understanding that when this thing launches, marketing is going to be involved.
Mm.
when this thing, when we review what we want to build for version 2, we have to talk to the support people and understand what went wrong in version 1, right? And all those pieces have to come together into what we're doing for the overall long-term development of a community program. So it's kind of a Trojan horse for really thinking about, how do we break down those silos without saying to each other, we've got silos, we need to break them down. No, we come in with a program that sort of overlies everything that we're doing, and we pull the right people to be involved. And then we do that same thing I was talking about, where we show really tangible success or really tangible stories. We show real people, we introduce them to real people, and all of a sudden the work that they're doing, the product they're developing, the product they're marketing, the support they're doing for the product, that that concept of the business structure starts to fade away, and it's the impact of what we're doing that starts to really increase, right? I understand now, when I market, I'm talking to that guy that I met yesterday,
Yeah.
right? Versus this segment or this persona, right? Or this audience, right? It becomes so much more human that now I'm really tapped into it. I understand how all these pieces get together. My siloed defenses start to lower significantly.
So with this, when you bring a group of people together as a community, you have any stories to share about managing or harnessing the collective knowledge?
Yeah, yeah. One of my favorite programs that we've done lately was for a company called Rapsodo. They make golf mobile launch monitors. So if you're a golfer and you are in your backyard or at the park and you're not actually at the golf course and you're hitting into a net 5 feet away from you, right? You want to know, I mean, sure, I connected to the ball, but did it hook left? Did it hook right? Did it go far enough to hit the green? Like I want to know these things, even though I only shot at 5 feet.
Mm.
And so you put this little device behind you that Rapsodo makes, and it uses a number of technologies like, I don't know, radars and cameras and all stuff that's above my pay grade. But and then on your phone, you can actually see in their app where this thing maps to, right?
Interesting.
Where did that ball go if we were on the course? It's pretty fascinating, right? And the problem in that market is that a lot of the devices that existed either were inexpensive and fairly inaccurate, or extremely accurate but also extremely expensive.
Mm.
And so instead of a product that had that extreme accuracy at $25,000, Rapsodo had built one that was 600 and almost as good as that $25,000 one from an accuracy standpoint.
Mm.
And so really amazing product. And that program, they brought me in to build a community driven product development program for them, CDPD as I call them. And we brought in 40 people. We sent them the products when they were still in brown cardboard boxes and not the final packaging, but the early enough that the feedback they give was still able to be put in, but far enough down the road that they were using, nearly real products, right?
Mhm.
And it was absolutely fascinating to see how fast a few things happened. One was when it was outside the lab, how well it worked and how well it worked over time, right? Because this is part of the challenge that we see in product testing is you can product test all you want in the lab, but that's a very specific environment with a very small number of people and use cases. But also when we ask people, hey, try this product, how did it work? A lot of times we ask once, right? Whether it's through a survey or through a product test or whatever, we ask once for a short period of time and oh yeah, they worked great the first time. But 6 times later, after the device is heated up in the sun 7 times, what happens then? Right? It's hard to know.
Mm.
And it's hard to know at scale. Uh, because that's a resource limited activity, right? It's hard, it's expensive to do that. But when we built this CDPD program for them, it was relatively inexpensive. It was a group of 40 people that we had found that were really passionate about golf, that were a collection of hobbyists of varying skill levels, but also a few semi-pros and people who were close to being pro in some form. And we put those folks all together, and we learned a lot about what happens when two people show up on the golf course after 6 weeks of use and have their devices next to each other. We learned things about how some of the technology in it was working on a wide variety of devices, as you might imagine, right? That the product team, they may have had all those devices, but the amount of hours that they could put into the vast collection of things that we had with 40 people over time was much broader. The product marketing folks loved that program because before they even started designing their marketing campaigns, we already had a very clear set of data about what was important to the end user. What were they excited about? What were some of the features that they got really interested in and excited to share with others? What were they telling people? What was their elevator pitch to other people who'd see them at the course? And that was all before any of the product had hit the market. So the product marketers were getting really interesting insights about how to build campaigns around stuff that in many cases they were verifying, yeah, I think this is going to be a really great feature. In other cases, they were surprised by what was exciting and interesting, that seems so small to when you're developing this product, right? Engineers are infamous for that, right? Because I spent 2/3 of the development time on this part of the application over here, then that's probably what people are going to pay attention to.
Hmm.
No, it's this one little small piece over here that's just kind of exciting and fun. And it took me 10 minutes in my spare time to build, but oh man, that's like the key product feature now, right? Um, and seeing those things in advance was pretty amazing. And then, of course, when we launched, we had 40 people that had already been using the product, that were already tapped into the Facebook groups, the Instagram channels, all over the web, um, who were basically correcting information. People come out and say, "Oh, it doesn't do this," or "This device is problematic this way," and we had 40 ambassadors from day one saying, for free, for no cost, no guidance, just going out and defending us on our behalf and saying, no, 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 no. I was one of the champions that was had early access, and it doesn't work like that at all. It works really great. Here's what you're doing wrong, or how you're thinking about something wrong, right? So it was sort of a full cycle, full stack of benefits that was relatively inexpensive, relatively low lift, right? This wasn't, a lot of product teams go, my God, this is going to be one more thing I've got to do. I'm already overwhelmed. I'm already crazy busy. But what happens pretty quickly is they start realizing how valuable this is to making their jobs easier, not harder. It's just a different way of thinking.
Wonderful. You mentioned earlier about one of the use cases being if, let's say, the renewal rates are falling, and then what do we do? And then how do we get the community activated, etc. Are there any cases where you can use the community for some leading indicators, not after something has happened, and then take some proactive steps?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always use this example because most everybody understands it. If you walk into the house one day, if you're getting home from work, and in my case, my wife's inside, and there's something wrong, you can feel it, right? I don't have any data yet. I don't have any quantitative stats on what happened that day that either I did wrong or something happened for her at work that kind of messed up her day. But I can walk in the room and I just feel it. I look at her face and I can just read it, right? I know, oh, I don't know what I did, but I better start apologizing, right? You just feel it. And community programs are exactly that, right? When you've been spending enough time in those spaces with those people, and this is the valuable power of a community manager whose job is to be participatory, to guide that community, to facilitate conversations. You can start to feel those things in advance. You start to know with at least a decent degree of certainty, if we launch that feature the way that you're thinking about it, the community customer base is going to go nuts. They are not going to enjoy that thing. And I can tell you some reasons why, but I can't prove it, right? Because it's qualitative, it's not quantitative. But more often than not, those are really, really important insights. And whether you do one of two things, either either you can say to that, I'm going to trust that and we're going to go make a fix because you're right. Right. When I walk in the house and I know my wife's mad at me, my attitude changes, right? And I start, yeah, I might soften my hard day a little bit to say, hey, what's going on for you? I don't go at the same speed I was going, right? Because I know something's shifted. Now, I can make an immediate change because I might understand well enough. Yeah, I looked over and I saw the kitchen was still dirty. I know she asked me to clean it this morning and I forgot. She's probably mad about that because that's happened 3 times this week. Okay, I know that one. I know it was some level of confidence and certainty. It may not be actually correct, but I've got a good enough place to start where I can take immediate action. Or the other part of that is I'm not sure what's happening yet, but it's a really interesting place to start a research hypothesis, right? When I come and say, hey, this might be a problem, then the engineers could say, okay, I don't want to act yet, but I'm going to go do some research. Or let's pull aside 3 or 4 or 5 community members, put them under NDA and share with them what we're working on and see what they have to say, right? But it's a prompt, right? It's the same way that I might change my attitude when I walk in the house and say, hey, is everything okay? It's enough to give me a course of action that may be more indirect, but is still a way to seek out information and find out what's going on. And the longer the community is in place, the more people are starting to interweave it into the company, and the more that there's good people who are there present throughout the community's life cycle, right? Community managers or the engineers spend more time there. Everybody starts to understand some vibes and some again qualitative, not quantitative understandings of what the customer base is feeling. And so much of what we do with our products is really at the end of the day, we can have the most effective product in the world, but if it just feels cheap, people are going to think it's cheap, even if it's a very expensive product, right? Feel and vibes and emotion are absolutely important in what we're doing, and we often don't pay enough attention to them.
These days, we cannot have a conversation without bringing in AI.
Yeah,
What is your
absolutely.
perspective on AI approaches or AI technologies
Well,
for communities?
so I'm absolutely fascinated with AI, and I'll tell you why here in a second. But let me just compliment you on that segue. That was a really great transition because I was just talking about how we can't do all quantitative, right? That qualitative and quantitative, that emotion and feeling are important. And what's the number one thing that AI can't do more than any other thing it can't do? Feelings and vibes and emotions, right? And so as we've been hearing a lot of people talk about, AI is a partner, it's not a replacement. It's augmentation, it's not automation, right? I don't believe in AI being a replacement for just about anything, really. There is going to be a few places where we can create agents that do certain tasks. And what I think is going to, again, this is all through my community guy lens, right? A very emotional, not logical lens. Graphing calculators came out, and a lot of math teachers said, well, that's terrible. You can't do that. How are they supposed to memorize these formulas? And what we discovered over time is that memorizing the formulas wasn't really important, but it took a ton of time, a ton of time. But once we started to train our students to use them, to think about the formulas, to understand how to think critically about which formula to use when, boy, their abilities skyrocketed, right? Because they weren't spending 30, 40, 50% of their time just remembering the formulas itself. They were thinking much more about how to apply the formulas. And I think that that's really, for me, that's really what AI comes down to, is how are we thinking about it as a creative and critical partner? And how are we using it to get ideas started? How are we using it to uh, take us in directions we might have not otherwise thought about it on our own? How do we free ourselves from some of the monotonous tasks to make more creative and interesting and emotional things happen? Um, but I also think at its core, I've been talking about this idea of what I'm calling AIX, right? AI experience design. And at its core, the idea of that is designing the relationship between humans and intelligent systems, AI of whatever that means, designing those relationships between humans and intelligent systems, not just the touch points or the tools or the screens that those humans use, right? We've spent a lot of time, as we should have, with things like user experience and interface design and that sort of thing, to make sure that when we sat down in front of a website or we sat down in front of a tool, that it was logical to our human brains, right? But those are touch points and they're screens, they're interaction interfaces. Now we're changing that, right? We're having a more humanistic type of conversation with intelligent systems. So the design of that relationship is now becoming increasingly important. And so, from my community guy standpoint, everything's relational to me, even when it's a AI intelligent system. How are you thinking about how to work with that system? How does it work into your workflow? And overall, the piece that I'm working on, the AIX, is one piece of overall business transformation, right? We went through digital transformation some years back where, a lot of companies that didn't have any real sense of digital functionality within the walls of their business had to really increase that. They had to rethink what commerce looked like to include e-commerce. They had to think about what their workflows were, how to digitize a lot of non-digitized systems, that sort of thing. And I think right now we're in a AI transformation space. And I think about those as a kind of a multi-pillar function of things like yes, the AI and automation strategy. How are we building those intelligent systems? But how are we redesigning our organizations, reskilling upskilling our existing talent, thinking about data ethics and our digital operating model, and what the culture of what we need to have happen when we have intelligent systems in place that are augmenting our processes, right? What does that do to our internal culture, and how are we promoting the idea of using AI systems, intelligent systems as partners, not replacements, right? And more other bits and pieces of those business transformation pillars as we've thought about them in the past. But yeah, I really do see it as a business transformation question as much as anything at this point.
Wonderful. We are almost out of time, but then I still have to ask you at least one question. It will be a short answer. What does it take to be a good community manager?
I think the simplest answer of that is perseverance. Anybody who deals with other humans knows that sometimes you just have to keep going, even if you're irritated, even if you're annoyed, right? So some perseverance is one. Empathy, really having an understanding and a desire to understand what motivates people on an emotional level. Communication and evangelism, right? This idea of really being able to communicate ideas, complex ideas, simply. And I know we're looking for a short answer, so I'll just leave it at those three. But those, I think, perseverance, empathy, and communication are definitely three of the big pieces.
Yeah, thanks, because that topic probably deserves a whole episode of things that we need to get into. So on that note, thanks a lot, Jake, for sharing your perspectives and the importance of communities, and then how that can be integrated in any kind of organization, and how it actually enhances the effectiveness of what teams build.
Yeah, I'm really I really had a fun conversation today, and it's always interesting to talk to engineering minded folks about this idea of community, because it does really matter to engineers as much as marketers, right? Or support professionals. It's part of how we do business in this new modern era. And yeah, if any of your listeners are interested, they can always reach out and talk more with me about all this stuff, whether it's for a client project or just a wanting to know more. I'm always happy, as you can probably tell, to talk community nerds. So they can find me at my website, jakemckee.com, or on LinkedIn, either one.
Thanks a lot, Jake.
Thank you.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client
and spread the word in your network.
If you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.